And we are off and running, I do believe. Welcome to another Lunch with Randy and Teddy. And as you see, Teddy is playing hooky again. So we don't know where his whereabouts are. But when we find out, we'll bring that breaking news to you. Randy Wooden with Goodwill Industries, Northwest North Carolina, director for our professional center. And every Wednesday we get together, Teddy and I do. And in this case, Sindy Martin fills in for Teddy as our co-host. Welcome, Sindy. Yep. And Cindy's going to want to turn her microphone on, I think, if she hasn't already. Is it really? Okay. Well, I'm not hearing it. So,
Kevin, can you hear me?
There it is. Yep. Now I can hear you. So all good. And also our guest today, Kevin Baker, and Kevin is the executive director with Piedmont Triad Airport Authority. We're going to peel back some layers of what goes on at the airport. And that's a lot. We'll cover all that. But first, let me throw it back to you, Cindy. If you would tell us a little bit more about you and what you do.
I have my own company. I teach business professionalism and etiquette all over the world. And I got into it because I am the child of a military officer. So I learned these things starting at the age of 3. And I enjoy it, and it helps people, and it changes their lives. And that makes me happy.
Sure it does. And I know, Cindy, you've helped our professional center many, many times over the years when we used to do a lot of the in-person monthly events. And so just a lot of real good feedback that we got from our clients. And I appreciate it. You've also been a guest 3 or 4 times on here. And we always learn things when we have you on. Today, you're a co-host. So today, you're going to be keeping an eye on the chat area. We've got a number of folks. By the way, Kevin, with Teddy always used to joke, and so I'll throw it in here. If we say we have 7,000 people on our program, divide by 1,000, and it's the new math. But anyway, we've got a few folks on now, and of course we stream it live on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. So we always learn things. We're going to learn more now. Kevin Baker, tell us a little bit more about your background. You're the executive director for Piedmont Triad Airport Authority. Give us your short bio. What brought you here?
Yeah, sure, Randy.
Yeah.
So I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I went to a school, Lehigh University, which was unknown in these parts until March 16th of 2012, whenever that young upstart team beat Duke in the first round of the championship here. But so I'm a civil engineer by training from Lehigh and I have a minor in finance. And I worked for about 20 years for a company called the Michael Baker Corporation in Pittsburgh, which is no relation to me. I always say my wife wishes. But that was a consulting company, and the company did a lot of work in designed roads, buildings, airports, runways, et cetera. I was in the airports group of that company and spent a lot of time all around the country working on airports. Came here with the FedEx project back in 1998, and our company ran that project for the airport. We were their program managers, which bled into the Honda project right on the tail end of that. And after that, I kind of got bitten by this economic development bug that I learned about and saw the potential of this airport, and was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to step into this role.
Gotcha. So now, how long have you been here in the Triad now?
Since 1998, so 25 years, and with the airport since 2008, so 15 years with the airport.
Yeah. So a lot to unpack here. We're going to talk. And by the way, if you have comments or questions for Kevin, please put them in the chat area, and Cindy, you'll keep an eye on that. We're going to ask questions about what makes PTI unique, Piedmont Triad International Airport. What makes it unique? What is an airport authority, and how does it differ from, I guess, the airport itself? Also look at some, and it's huge, some of the influence and the impact that the airport has economically in our area, and some of the businesses that are tied to and do business with the airline industry. How has COVID impacted things? Everybody's also hunting for workers, and I imagine also it's tough to find pilots. Cindy, you want to be a pilot?
Yeah.
Let's give it a whirl, right? We're going to cover those topics and more. So if you, again, have comments, questions for Kevin, put them in the chat area. I always ask the why question. You mentioned you were kind of bitten by the bug, but I mean, as a kid growing up, did you have a fascination with air travel? I mean, what was it that kind of turned it for you to say, hey, this is something I really want to pursue?
Yeah, so it really does go back to when I was a kid. I'm the only child of a large family, if you ever heard that phrase, where there were five of them, and then I came along 11 years after that. So I had a 21-year-old brother who, when I was in diapers, he was flying F-4s in Vietnam, and he became sort of my hero. I followed his career over years, and I actually wanted to fly, but I had vision issues. You want to be a U.S. Air Force pilot, you have to have 20/20 vision, and I had like 2800 vision, so it wasn't going to work. But why I do what I do comes back to that point that I made to you before, about the fact that I was a civil engineer working in Michael Baker Corporation, and it was, and I don't say this to sound boastful at all, but it was kind of a known fact that I had my eye on the top seat at that company. And that was always a goal. But after, being involved in the FedEx project, then the Honda project, and if you have even the opportunity to be involved in just a little part of creating jobs and creating opportunity in a place that you love to live, which we have grown to love to live where we are, there's a value to that you can't put money to it. You can't put anything to it. I just, at least in my opinion. And, I could see at that time that this place had incredible potential to grow and to be a huge, important part of the aerospace industry that you're now seeing happen. I mean, it was starting to happen already at that point. You had industry voting with its feet, companies like Honda and HAECO and FedEx. But, as we'll talk, we've kind of made it a laser focus of ours to grow that. And so, I just saw that to be a really cool opportunity that I wanted to be part of. Yeah, and I love what I do. I've got a bunch of friends that they joke, they'll say the only person that I know that loves their job is Kevin Baker. So, and I really do. I love what I do.
I see Teddy is, and Sindy loves, and I like what I do too. Now, Teddy is lurking there. I don't know whether he realizes he's on our show and he's frozen. So he may just be there to keep us in line, Sindy. So just so you know, there he is. There he is. See Teddy. There he is. PTI. We've all heard of it. At least here in the local area, we've heard of it. What makes PTI unique or different?
Well, I sometimes, and people, after I use this euphemism, they say that's really a dumb euphemism. But I will often call it the Sesame Street Airport from time to time. And the reason for that is, you remember the game that they used to play on Sesame Street, that which one of these things is not like the other? That describes this airport really globally, I would say, certainly in the US and certainly in this state. Why are we different? Because of the fact that, when you think about an airport, you traditionally think about a place of transportation, right? It's a place where you go to get on an airplane, or your relatives do, or, you're sending packages on airplanes to other places. It's a place where things and people get moved to and from. And we certainly have that. And that's certainly a really important part of our mission. But on the other side, we are a place of employment. There are 8,600 people working within a mile of where I'm sitting right now, all for the most part in the aerospace industry. Now, of that 8,600, some of them are the airline folks, some of them are our staff, which is just 125. And then there's other folks who are, the rental car companies, et cetera. But for the most part, that 8,600 is made up from Honda, HAECO, FedEx, Cessna, Boom, iAero, Signature Flight Service. So all of these companies that are on the airport that are doing really one of three or four things. So there's certainly cargo, right? And that's FedEx and all the logistics functions, basically, which is FedEx and all the other carriers. Aircraft design, aircraft maintenance, and aircraft construction. And in those fields, you have literally thousands of people here making this, one of the absolute centers of employment in the region. If you get the Triad Business Journal and you look at the top employers in the region on a year-to-year basis, and you aggregate all of our employers together, there's 50 some employers here altogether. You aggregate them together and get this number of 8,600 employees. That makes us number 5 in the triad in terms of places of employment. Now, it's a little bit tongue in cheek, right? Because it's not the airport authority that's employing all those people. It's 50 separate companies that are on the airport, but it's a defined campus. All of those companies, all of those people need to be on the airport. So, I think that it is. I don't think that it's a bad way to consider it versus the other employers in the region. It's an accurate way to look at it. So, I think that and some of the things that made those companies decide to come here, the fact that, start off with, you're in the middle of the East Coast of this country, you're jumping off point for Europe. You're within a 2-hour flight of 85% of the population of this country, I think is the stat. We have a roadway system in the triad that I can't find it anywhere else in the country. I mean, you've got roads that are 4 and 5 lanes, some of which you could sit in a rocking chair and not fear for your life. And people say, well, you're calling that a good thing, that there's no traffic? Yeah, that's a great thing, because that's future capacity for growth, for this area to grow. And companies come here and they get out on those roads and they're like, hey, there's no traffic. I don't have to sit in 3 hours worth of traffic to get from my house to the airport, so that then get down to, the community. This is just a wonderful place to live. It's a low cost of living, a low cost of doing business. We're, hours to the beach, hours to the mountains. The school systems are good. And then you drill down even further to the airport itself. You've got long runways with the sort of sexiest runway approaches that we could have in terms of the instrument landing systems, et cetera. We've got land. We have 1,000 acres of land that we'll be talking about on this. I was
going to ask you about that. I mean, if you're landlocked, you're stuck, but you've got room for growth there, not just with the roads with capacity, but also land. So that's good to know.
We do. And that's actually key. I mean, we're constantly asking ourselves the question, where are we going next? Once that's full, where are we going after that? And so, to have all of those attributes that we just went through, and then to have a community that has for 40 years been a center of aerospace excellence, because, you had Piedmont Airlines founded in Winston-Salem. They had a huge hangar right out my window here that has now became Timco. Now it's become HAECO. And these are folks who have worked on airplanes, airframe and power plant mechanics, they call them A&P mechanics, for decades now. And so you build up this bench strength in the area that really, that leads to other companies seeing the area as a place where they'll be able to find the type of employee they need to have. So take all of that stuff and put it together in a nice basket, and you can't find all of that together anywhere else in the world, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, interesting. And I don't know if this is something, Sindy, you had a comment?
Well, at this time, before we go into further away from that, talking about what gets employed, Dale Bondanza has asked the question about technology at the airport, and all the way from scheduling through to FBO. So is that part of the airport? I mean, there's so much technology out there to make all of that happen. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So each individual entity out here has its own use of and need for technology, right? Some of them are on the low end of that scale. Some of them are Honda aircraft, and they've got literal rocket scientists who are over there designing the next airplane or the next engine or whatever. And so, I think it's on a case by case basis to who needs what level of technology. But certainly it's fair to say that all of our major tenants have a need for the airframe and power plant mechanics, again, avionics. Okay, so you have to have people who know how to work on the equipment in an airplane that guides that airplane through the sky to the runways, et cetera. And the counterpart to what's in the airplane, and that's what's on the ground, the equipment that's here on the ground that is sending signals into the sky to help guide the airplanes. With the airport authority, for the most part, our job is more to manage a facility. We're kind of a commercial property manager. And then we have all these tenants. You can almost think of us like a mall, and we're the mall manager. And, you've got HAECO, that's Macy's over there, and Honda is pick another company and go all the way around. And our role is more of a physical, manage the building, manage future growth of the building. But there is the piece of the airfield that we have to handle, which is all of the equipment that's out on the airfield, all the lighting, all the electronics that are helping guide planes again. So, it's, again, case by case basis for each of our users, but it's all over the place.
You touched on the word authority, and so that leads me into another question. I've heard of a transit authority and whatever. So, what's the difference between the airport and the airport authority?
Yeah, so the airport is the physical place, right? It is the airport. It's the place that you come. The authority is the managing body thereof. And airports around the country are run in a different number of fashions. For instance, Charlotte is run by the city of Charlotte. Baltimore Washington International, BWI, is run by the state of Maryland, believe it or not. A lot of smaller airports that you might see driving on a country road somewhere are run by the counties. And then probably 50-60% of airports nationwide are run by airport authorities that are established in various ways. In our case, we're an animal of the state legislature. In 1941, the state legislature said there is created an authority that has the responsibility to own and operate the Piedmont Triad International Airport. And that in our case, that legislation also points out how those members are to be appointed. And in the case of this airport, the appointments are each of the three large cities, the city councils of the three large cities, Winston, High Point, Greensboro, all appoint one member. Forsyth County appoints one member. And Guilford County appoints three members. Now, the only reason why Guilford appoints more than everybody else is because that's the only political body that the airport sits inside of. A lot of times people will call it the Greensboro Airport. GSO is the call sign. Obviously, that's been a confusing thing for many, many decades, but not a single square foot of this airport sits in the city of Greensboro. It's all just in the Guilford County. And then so those members that are appointed by Guilford County also have a breakdown that one has to be somebody who lives in and works in High Point. One has to be one who lives in Greensboro, and the other is at large anywhere from the county. It could be High Point, Greensboro, just in the unincorporated parts of the county. And so what we end up with is, I like to call it a geopolitically disparate group of individuals who come together for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to run this airport, to set the strategy basically for this airport. And they act more like the board of a small private company, and we operate more like a private company than a political entity. This board has traditionally been very strong, made up of community leaders from various different parts of the community, a lot of business leaders, some political leaders, but just all in all, a bunch of really smart people who are really dedicated and focused on running the airport. It was, another one of the reasons I was a consultant to airports, as I told you guys, for, a couple decades, and I never envisioned going to work for an airport, but the way that this authority was established was really appealing to me because there weren't no politics that were involved in it, and that made it something that I really liked.
Yeah, to the degree that you can or feel comfortable talking about. I mean, Winston had an airport, it was pretty good airport, and then over time, the one that you run, which isn't technically, I guess, in Greensboro, but what caused the PTI to rise above in terms of, I guess, number of flights and everything else? Was it land? Was it what's the story behind that?
Well, Smith Reynolds is still a great facility, and it's got a different purpose and focus now, necessarily, obviously. But they also have an authority over there. Mark Davidson runs it. He's a great guy. And again, I think that they have a focus on, they're focused on a good place to be focused for that airport. With respect to what happened, I mean, I think the communities got together decades ago and decided that this would be the regional airport. And I wasn't in those rooms. That was what I call BK before Kevin. since, in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And it was decided that this would be a regional airport that was that was the focus of all of the communities. But I think also with that, because if you think back, even when I moved here, in fact, for probably 5, 6, 7 years after I moved here, Smith Reynolds still had service that was just a flight down to Charlotte, basically. And, I think that was actually more or less just because it was the beginnings of Piedmont and it was sort of a historical, we've got to keep this flight going kind of thing. But the airlines have really gotten to the point where they're so focused on markets and so lean in places that they don't have the ability to be able to serve markets like that anymore. I mean, we've lost a lot of service, compared to RDU or Charlotte over the years, especially with COVID, we'll be talking about here in a little while, pilot issues. So, I think it's just a matter of the airport world kind of morphing and growing and, the focus changing just a bit over decades.
Yeah. And Sindy. Yeah.
I am curious if you know about this hysterical fact that Burriss, North Carolina, honestly tried to annex the airport to make it the Kernersville Airport.
This airport?
When was that?
No, I did not know that.
It was BK, I gather, right?
BK.
Was it BK? Yeah.
Oh, it was definitely BK because I was the assistant at the town of Kernersville, so I know.
How about that? Wow. That would be interesting.
I never heard that one.
They're a brave little town. What can I say?
I think you've already kind of touched on this, Sue, but I'll throw it at you. And if you want to clarify or add any more to it, one of the things you wanted to talk about was how has the authority gotten PTI into this position? So I think you've touched on that a good bit. Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that, this required a very serious focus, obviously. And about 10 years ago, we got a group of people in our boardroom right next door to me here, sitting around a table. And the question that I asked all of them, so what could happen here? In other words, by that point, you've had FedEx, you've had Honda, you've had all this stuff. What else might happen here? And then we just started throwing out ideas and, the typical brainstorming session, you got the big Post-it notes stuck on the wall. You guys have done it. Probably everybody on the call has done it. And, then we boiled all of that down to a couple of things that we thought might be the, a future possibility. And, on the outside of that might be, could we land a Boeing manufacturing plant? That's sort of that would be the Cadillac, the huge thing. But, shy of that, will Honda grow? Will Cessna grow? Will FedEx grow? Might there be some other company who's out there that might be looking for a place to manufacture airplanes at some point? Boom. Right. So at that time, nobody knew what boom was. It didn't exist. But we had to think sort of in the abstract as to we don't know what's going to happen, but we certainly knew that those kind of possibilities were there. And then after you get that, then you say, well, what do we need to support that? And mainly it's getting land, right? So we set out to acquire a bunch of land to make more sense of land that we already owned. By that, I mean, there were places where you own almost all the way out to, say, some major road like 68, but you're missing 3 or 4 pieces in there that make the site basically unusable at a large scale. So we had to fill those in. And then we had what we called enabling projects that were a list of 14 or 15 projects that would enable those sites, that land that we're acquiring, to be used by an airplane ultimately, or a company manufacturing airplanes or maintaining airplanes or running cargo, whatever it might be. And developed this list, had engineers put together an estimate of what all that would cost. The number was $350 million. And for the next number of years, I took that on the road to go try and sell to our federal officials, our state officials, local elected officials, and got laughed out of a bunch of boardrooms. Wow. Good luck finding $350 million, but here we sit today, and of all of that, we managed to, through value engineering, reduce the overall cost down to about $280 million. So we'd save 20% or so over the years, but we're basically done with that investment. And it has come it has been, it wasn't like somebody said, here's $280 million, go get it done. It was, all right, this year we've got 10 million bucks. Let's go build this. Let's go build that, whatever it is next year, et cetera, until you get it all accomplished. Probably the biggest piece of all of it was the construction of the taxiway bridge and the construction of Interstate 73, which that bridge goes over. Without that bridge, there's 600 acres on the other side of 73 that we own that we wouldn't be able to access with an airplane. And so that was absolutely critical to get that built. And, kudos to the foresight of a lot of people at DOT, Doug Gallion, who was our local representative and the chairman for a while, Mike Fox, who's the current chairman and who has been an incredible help getting us funding. And we've been really blessed at the state level too, through a number of governors and certainly with the legislature. Senator Berger has been a huge supporter of this airport for years. And, without that kind of, people have to take a risk and say, this is a risk. We're going to go put a lot of money into this. And, a lot of people would ask me questions over the years, aren't you concerned that you're going to build this bridge and nobody will use it? And I'd say, no, my concern was always that somebody would come here and would need the bridge, but we couldn't get it all built in a time frame that would suit that company, and we lose the company. So I think that's a way bigger fear than what we have now. There's 10 companies in line for it right now that we're competing with. So I like where we stand, and all of that. It's a long view that you have to take with airports. You got to say you can't worry about being fulfilled with some great win in 2 months. It's going to be 10 years, 20 years, whatever it might be, when you're talking about things like this.
I used to work as a headhunter years ago, and a lot of what we dealt with was consumer durables and the automotive industry. And this was back when I lived in Ohio. And of course, Detroit, Michigan was a center for automobile assembly and manufacturing, but there were a lot of tier 2 suppliers, those who supply the automotive industry. And so that's an ecosystem in and of itself, that the feeder companies that help the Hondas and other ones who I assume have to buy parts to then assemble them. So how far down the food chain are you? Are you mostly dealing with the tier 1 folks that put the finished product together, or are you also dealing and attracting those tier 2 and 3 suppliers?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And, the actual manufacturer is called the OEM. Randy, you know that, it sounds like. And then, in the aviation world, there's tier 1 through tier 4 subcontractors. And so an example, OEM is Honda. They're assembling an airplane, or Boeing or Airbus, whatever. A tier 1 supplier in this world are companies that make a fuselage, a wing box, so that the entire wing section, the empennage, which is the tail section of an airplane, engines, landing gear. Those are engines, tier 1, landing gear, you're probably getting into tier 2. But anyway, with the airport's focus, necessarily must be on only those entities that have to be on an airport. This is an FAA regulation. We can't go out and say, well, Uniroyal is going to make tires for airplanes, and we want to put them on the airport because they're making tires. Well, those tires can get into a truck and get shipped here, no problem.
Okay.
So we have this test, this litmus test of, do they need to be on an airport? And that usually stops with the tier 1s. A major structural provider like the fuselage, you could very well argue needs to be. Sometimes even those are shipped, by the way. But you can certainly make an argument that it's efficient if you manufacture the fuselage, it comes across the road into another building where it gets assembled and joined to its wing box and everything else. So we're very, very focused on the tier 1s. Having said that, we work all the time with the local chambers of commerce. You mentioned you have Mark Owens on earlier, Brent Christensen. We work with these folks all the time in terms of promoting the aviation industry overall, not just on the airport. And nothing would thrill me more than to have the tier 2, 3, 4 companies who are manufacturing whatever. There's 3 or 4 million parts on a large commercial airplane. Somebody's going to make every single one of them. Think about that. And so, to have those kinds of manufacturers all over the Triad is a great thing. And we talked about the roads earlier.
Yeah.
It's that roadway system that gives us an upper leg to be able to have somebody who's manufacturing knobs for radio dials in Forsyth County, and they come across 40 or business 40, and they're here efficiently. Or somebody in Rockingham County, they come down 73. You get the point. I mean, from anywhere in the Triad, access here is really efficient and getting better every year.
It helps the supply chain for sure. Hey, by the way, folks, we're halfway through Lunch with Randy and Teddy. It's our final show of July. Wow. The month flew by. Kevin Baker is our guest. Kevin is the executive director for the Piedmont Triad Airport Authority, and Sindy Martin filling in as co-host today. Teddy Burriss is on the lam. I don't know where he is. He's out gallivanting around somewhere, but he'll keep an eye on us, keep us straight. By the way, if you have comments or questions for Kevin, put them in the chat. Sindy will keep an eye on that and work them in where appropriate. All right. So again, you kind of touched on some of this too, and that is, what are the industries that you're focused on attracting to PTI? That was something that, you've done well so far, but what's that crystal ball look like?
Yeah, so we are really laser focused on the OEMs, and that's number one. Number two would be the tier one subs that we just talked about, and number three would probably be MROs. So in our world, lots of acronyms, sorry, but in our world, MRO stands for maintenance, repair, and overhaul. So that's like HACO, or it could also be a smaller MRO like Cessna. This is the second busiest MRO that they have in their system out of 16, I think, nationwide. Very, very busy. It's a service station. If you own one of these things, that's where you take it to get service. It's just like if you own a Honda automobile and you take it to the Honda dealership to have new brakes put on it. Do the same exact thing here with your airplane, or whether it's your Honda airplane or your Cessna airplane. So the MRO world also just a very big part of what we do. But the reason why the OEM is the number one focus is exactly the point that you made before, Randy. That the presence of the OEM locally creates a demand to have all of those other suppliers locally, and that really has actually been reinforced in the last decade, because Boeing sort of leads the charge. Everybody watches Boeing to see what they're doing. In terms of manufacturing things and just the way that they do their business. And, there was a time whenever they were building the Dreamliner in Charleston, South Carolina, that's the 787, where they were sourcing those 5 or 6 million products on that airplane from all around the world. And they had a lot of problems with just-in-time delivery of those parts, with parts arriving and bolt holes not aligning in fuselages and things like that, just major issues that they were unable to reach out and tap their provider, their supplier on the shoulder and say, you messed this up, fix it, because that supplier might be in Australia. So I think that the industry is now kind of coalescing back around the OEM locations. And for instance, whenever Boom made its announcement, they also announced that they would have no supplier further than 200 or 300 miles. I forget what the number was away, because they want to have everybody close by. So OEMs bring other business as well.
Yeah, and it increases the tax base, and it's a win in jobs. And so once, what is the old bill that they will come? I guess
that's right. In
some ways, for you baseball fans, that's a movie from days gone by. Again, talking with Kevin Baker. Kevin, air service, it's been through a lot, as everyone has with COVID. I mean, your airport must have taken a nosedive, no pun intended, but just the whole industry was ravaged by COVID, and nobody's flying anywhere, and who wants to sit next to somebody in an airplane? And walk us through that as COVID hit, and some of the, I guess, adaptive things you've had to do over the last 3 years, and where do you stand these days?
Yeah. So April 18th, 2020 was low water for us. Yeah. On a normal day before COVID, there would be 3,500 enplanements here. So 7,000 total. There'd be 3,500 people getting off of an airplane, 3,500 people getting on airplanes, roughly, at this airport on a typical day.
Yeah.
That day, there were 75 people. So that tells you what happened. We went to zero, basically. We went all the way down to 75 people when it should have been 3,500 getting on an airplane on that particular day. We went from probably 55, 58 daily flights to 4, of which few had many people on. So it was bad. It was really bad. And what was happening even before COVID was this thing called a pilot shortage. And this is really happening because a lot of baby boomers are starting to be forced to retire, because FAA has a rule that you have to retire by 65. And so a lot of the baby boomers are getting to that age, obviously, or have gotten to that age. And so the industry long recognized a coming problem, and I'm talking about back as early as probably 13 or 14. And we're working towards fixing that. Well, then here comes COVID. And within months, all the airlines are saying, we got no flight, we're not doing any flying here. We don't need flight crews. And they started offering early retirements and other incentives to especially the more senior crews, both. And that's not just pilots. It was pilots. It's the flight attendants. It's the maintenance people, all of whom left early. Then all of a sudden, the market kind of rebounded faster than the airlines ever thought it would. And as you remember, even the summer of 2020, but especially the summer of 2021, and really all of 2021, became this crazy leisure travel year. We called it the never-ending summer because kids, normally it's September, everything drops off because kids go back to school, either college or grade, younger kids, and travel for leisure stops because vacation season's over. Well, in 20 and 21, kids were being schooled from home, and people will go on vacation, say, hey, what the heck? We'll go on vacation in October. The kids can sit at the beach and be in science class. We can all argue whether or not that was good, bad, or indifferent, but it was what was happening. So, the never-ending summers, I guess, really brought the numbers back pretty quickly. But the problem now is that you're short of these pilots. And what happens is the middle experienced pilots would move up to the senior captains roles. The juniors would move up to the middles, leaving this gap at the bottom. They're not filling it at the time because nobody's going anywhere. Nobody's getting training during COVID. They weren't able to fill it fast enough before COVID even hit. Now you've compounded the problem by increasing the exit number, right? The number of the attrition is higher, and you're not filling it as fast. So the problem has gotten really a lot worse. And so it really hurt markets like us, because what happened is the airlines said, well, we're gonna fly our most important routes, meaning Atlanta to New York is going to get service before PTI to New York is going to get service.
Yeah.
And then you also have an issue with, so the CEO of United Airlines a year and a half ago came out and said, look, we've got 100 regional jets that are parked in the desert right now because we don't have the crews to fly them. One of those is, at that time, you might be able to see it. Too bright out there maybe, but there's a United regional jet sitting right outside my window that normally we'd have a couple of those that are going to Dulles on a daily basis. Well, that airplane's not flying right now, and therefore we still don't have service to Dulles Airport as a result of that issue. And that same guy who was the CEO of United predicted this could be as long as 5 years before this tidal wave that we're in starts to finally calm down. So, what it means to us is reduced numbers of flights. Our seats actually right now, what's the difference? The numbers of seats are really, that's sort of our market measure, because that's a measure of the number of people that could fly out of here as opposed to flights. So what's the difference? That airplane I just showed you has 80 seats on it. We've got a lot more bigger airplanes flying right now that have 170 seats on it. So you got a lot more seats, even though there's fewer airplanes flying them.
That's kind of what I was going to ask you about is, and, if you have fewer pilots, what if you just had larger planes and you can fly them around? But it looks like you've tackled that. I've got to wonder, all industries have really faced the labor crunch. But in your case, it's not as though you can just hire a guy like me off the street and say, we'll teach you what you need to know. What is and just, a thumbnail sketch of what does it take to be a pilot in terms of years and what they have to go through to qualify.
Yeah, I mean, most people will tell you it takes a year to 18 months and $100,000. It is a lot of training, a lot of, there's school training part of it, obviously, and all the book training. And then there's the practical training where they're learning on a small airplane and they have to get so many hours, and then they can fly themselves then. And one of the big hot topics of debate is the number of hours required to become a commercial pilot. And the number right now is 1,500. And that's, again, it's hotly debated. I don't do politics. I stay out of all of them, so I won't formulate any opinions for you here. But what it is causing a fight between the pilots unions, who think that there should be at least 1,500 hours. And some will say that that's because they want to make sure there's a constant demand for pilots, whereas if you only have 700 hours, only need 700 hours, you can have more pilots more quickly. And then the demand for pilots reduces and they don't have as much salary control, et cetera, not as much leverage for negotiating. And again, I'm not taking any positions. I'm simply telling you what the debate is in the industry. On the other side, and the pilots will also argue that that's, it's a safety thing. On the other side, you have there's an argument that the simulators should count. An hour in a simulator should count for as much as 10 hours in a small airplane. And the thought process there is that, number one, it gets you your hours faster. And number two, you're flying a simulator for the type of airplane that you're likely to fly once you become a captain for a commercial airline. Whereas right now, the way most pilots get those 1,500 hours is by becoming a teacher, an instructor. And so while they're teaching somebody else how to fly, they're gaining hours in that airplane. Or things like going to the beach and flying that banner that says "Eat at Joe's Crab Shack" up and down the beach. Yeah. And so the question is, does 1,000 hours in a Cessna 172 dragging a banner, is that more valuable than 100 hours in a simulator for the same airplane I just pointed to you guys? I don't know the answer to the question, but that's the issue.
I got you. Cindy, you had a comment or a question to throw in?
Kevin, I'm curious, do you work with some of the learning institutes that have aviation? I know my nephew went and got his through GTCC. So do you talk with them? Do you have a connection with them to get more people interested in doing this?
Absolutely. It's not just with GTCC, it's for SciTech, it's even Alamance. And then you get into NCA&T is producing a lot of engineers that go to work for Honda. So it's really all the schools, and there's a very focused workforce development initiative for this industry. It's really being run mostly by the Piedmont Triad Partnership, PTP. There's a lady there named Penny Whitehart who knows more about aviation in this state than anybody, I think. And she knows a lot, especially about the human resources that exist in this state as part of that industry. And, I think what GTCC is a crown jewel to us. And for SciTech in there also, but they just started their school like a year ago, right? Whereas GTCC has been here 30 years, 35 years. And without them, you don't have that continuous pipeline of new employees to go to work across the runway at HAECO or Honda or Cessna or wherever. And you don't have the ability to tell a new customer who wants to come in here that pipeline exists. We had one company who was very concerned, said, "Hey, am I sure that I want to come to your airport whenever you've got Honda, HAECO, all these companies already employing a whole bunch of people in this industry?" And our answer was to bring somebody in from HAECO who told them about problems that they had with Honda early on in terms of keeping employees. So those two companies were losing people to each other for 25 cents an hour for a while. But the aerospace community on the airport all worked together, starting with them, add Cessna, add GTCC, to make sure that they were collectively solving this problem by creating a rising tide that will lift all of those ships, right? And so I think that environment here is really strong. And I think that the companies who look at us from outside of the area recognize that. And it's really helpful. So it's absolutely a key relationship.
Well, one of the other
Mhm.
things that almost came up at one time was for that type of training to be offered free at the community colleges. Do you know what are some of the initiatives that you've heard in working with these community colleges to attract more people that maybe are economically strained?
Yeah, I think, and I'm not an expert on the packages that the schools offer and the pricing packages. So I don't want to go there in terms of, making strong opinions on it. But what I do know is that there are programs that will help. And it's not kids. This is not kids. The average age at GTCC was 35 last year, I think. A lot of people, selecting a new career, maybe that kind of thing. But so helping individuals be able to afford that school is certainly something that a lot of them do. I do have some experience because I served on the foundation board at GTCC for a number of years. And even there was sort of like the president's scholarship, where the president could offer a scholarship to a number of individuals each year, and that might be $1,000, and that might cover the tuition at a GTCC. So there are definitely options out there without question. But I'm not the expert.
Got one other thing you wanted to talk about too was some of the current and future projects that you're working on, and maybe some of this stuff has to stay under the radar until it's a done deal. But what are some things you're working on?
Well, again, that all of that work that I told you that we kind of spitballed out and put on the wall, still buying and grading land, and I'll call it speculatively. We don't have a customer for all of it yet, but we're continuing to acquire land, and then after that we go in and we get that land graded and all ready for a company to be able to come in and use it. And a lot of that goes to when I was a young engineer consultant, I had a mentor who said, Baker, he's called me just Baker, said, Baker, any project has a scope, budget, and schedule. So scope, what are you going to build? How much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? And his theory was the client gets to pick two of those things. Because if you want a $5 million house and you want it next Friday, well, then that's going to define how much of a house can be built in 1 week, right? Or if you want a 50-story building and you want it next Friday, well, it's going to cost you, right? Because trying to build something in 1 week is expensive. In our view, in order to be able to lure the next Honda, Hayco, Boom, whatever it is, we need to be able to answer all three of those things. We need to be able to say, we've got the land that you need. We've got everything you need to build the scope of work that you want. We've got all the utilities there. We've got roads that are, that provide access. We've got taxiway access. We've got big sites. There's no environmental issues. We've already taken care of all that. We keep the cost very low by doing everything as efficiently as we possibly can. Very often killing 2 or 3 birds with one stone. You might have an area that's low that you've got to fill in with dirt, and you've got 2 other areas that are high. You cut the tops off of the high areas and you move that dirt to the low area. Now you've got 3 sites all done for the cost of one, just by moving that dirt in to fill that one up. So, we do things like that to keep the costs low. And then from a schedule perspective, which I think is really most important, because when companies come here, they say, we need to be open and operating in 18 months. Can you name that tune? If not, we're going to South Carolina, we're going to Wichita, we're going wherever. And that's the nightmare scenario to me. And we've done everything to make sure that we're never sort of the long pole in the tent, especially the environmental process, which can take years to get that done. We've gotten 1,000 acres under what's called a finding of no significant impact. So we went through an environmental assessment for 974 acres, I think it is altogether, and have that all cleared, if you will, from an environmental perspective that really shortens the process by which any company who's interested in our sites would need. So, those kind of projects continue out there. And then we've just finished a control tower, as probably you guys know, opened that up about a year ago, I guess, at this point. We've got a terminal modification project that we're working on right now. That's going to the main terminal building has been renewed in the last 10 years or so, and is fairly modern. The lower level needs to be done. It's kind of dated and 40 years. Looks like it's 40 years old in some places. And then the two concourses where you actually get on the airplanes, those are really dated, and we know it. And they feel like a 1970s bus station in Newark, New Jersey to me. So we need to fix those, and we're looking at some really cool ideas that I think. One of our goals is to make this place a destination so that when people arrive here, they say, I've arrived in a really cool community, one that tells the story when they enter here, things like golf and basketball, the tradition of that, not to mention the tradition of textiles, furniture, tobacco, and then really though focused on the fact that we're very much an aerospace community now, and make sure that the design of this building screams we're an aerospace community to those coming in.
Yeah. And I know with Goodwill, we get involved with a lot of skills training. I work for Goodwill and based out of Winston, Goodwill of Northwest North Carolina, and high-end electronics, aviation, advanced manufacturing. Those are all hot topics that people are getting trained on. So we hear what you're saying and what those needs are. And in our case, we work closely with Forsyth Tech. Of course, we're in Forsyth County, but anyway, lots going on. We've got about another 8-9 minutes. In a couple 3, I'm going to ask you to summarize, and a couple 3-4 takeaways you'd like folks to remember. And again, if you have a comment or question for Kevin, put it in the chat area. We'll try to work those in. Cindy, thanks for keeping an eye on that and keeping me straight. But maybe it's time also for a look at a crystal ball or a magic wand. And as you look down the road, there's challenges, whether it's legislative, dollars, the economy, there's all kinds of things. So you've identified some hurdles. If you would just kind of give us a couple, 3 of the hurdles that you're attacking or being hit with, and then what are some things that in a perfect world you'd like to see happen?
Yeah, I think the state of North Carolina 5 or 6 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, maybe, put together a funding stream annually for airports that really helps us be able to cash flow things properly every year. And I think that, that was really important. But obviously, when we have these major projects that come along that are going to employ 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people, there's a serious effort that has to go into that. And, whether or not you like incentives, I personally don't. I wish there were no incentives in the whole country. But if you want to play in this game, that's part of the game. And I think that the state is really playing well in that game. And incenting companies to come here for all the right reasons. And so I think that, from that perspective, the state is in a really good position. The state has won a number of accolades from site selectors, which are, there are companies that do nothing but help companies find sites in this country, in the world, to locate plants and so forth. And this has been the number 1 for a number of years now. And you can get into different industries, but aviation, we're top spot for that world. So I think that, overall, we're in a really good place, Randy, from, that perspective. Yeah. And I noticed, I was just looking on my screen, somebody asked a question about empty gates. And before we run out of time, I'll address that. If you come here at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning, you're not going to see an empty gate. Every single one of them will be filled. And this place looks a little bit like Charlotte, not quite that bad, but a little bit. It's very busy at that time of the day. If you come here whenever there's not a bank going on, in other words, the planes are not here getting ready to load and go, then yeah, it's going to look dead. It's just the way any airport of this size especially is going to look. But really, even a Charlotte, you can find times where there's a big lull in the amount of people. But we do have some empty gates they're not leased, that aren't being used by any airline. And that's something we're actually looking at in this concourse redesign, to right size things. So we might end up cutting back on a few of the gates that we have, while always maintaining the ability to grow back if we need to, cut back for the short term, because that's less square footage, it's less cost, it's less maintenance cost, et cetera. And we don't want to have empty gates either. But I recognize the question, and it's true. It is. I mean, there are times if you get in here, if you arrive, late at night, you can walk down here and be the only aircraft that's deboarding. It's just the way it is, especially if it's a very late flight.
Interesting. Yeah, it's I don't fly very often, but yeah, I remember as a kid they used to let me in the cockpit. What a thrill that was! And I don't know that they do that anymore. Remember TWA? That was back in the day, and little pilot wings, and I got to put the hat on, and just felt like quite the guy. And great experience. I'll tell you what. We're pretty much short on time. Quick question for you. We talk about remote employees in business in general, and I get it that you got to have a lot of hands-on. I mean, to fix things and assemble things, you got to have people hands-on. But do you see the internet and remote work being a way to help with at least some of the jobs that are needed to be filled?
I probably could find a few.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I am staunchly in favor of getting back to work in offices. We've even talked to our consultants. So these are people like I was, 30 years ago that are young engineers trying to learn their craft and trying to do it like this on a screen like this. Yeah. And you just do not learn from your mentors that way. You can't pick up a nuance of the way somebody might handle a client, for instance. Maybe you've got a major issue with a client. You've done something wrong and you're trying to resurrect a relationship. You cannot do that here, and you can't learn how to do that like this. So I'm a big proponent of getting back in the office, and I say it pretty often, actually, especially to the consultant industry, because I just don't think that 10 years from now that we're going to have the same caliber of consultants available if these folks aren't learning from those who have learned the hard way.
Yeah. Hey, I see it. You said you're from Pittsburgh, right?
Yes.
Pittsburgh. Is any Steelers stuff back? What's on your shelf back there?
Let's see.
Any Pirates?
One thing I will show you.
What you got there?
The Steelers are actually over there, which I can't turn.
Okay.
But I will. Let me bring it to you. Hold on. This is fun.
All right. The Stillers. That's how you have to say it. The Stillers.
Exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
So, they say act like you got there. One of the football coaches, when somebody got a touchdown and was celebrating, act like you got
Yep.
there. Well, I've got this. I don't know whether you can see that with the reflection.
Lehigh beats Duke.
Yes, and that's actually supposedly a picture of the overhead board from the Coliseum in Greensboro. That's really the score. But this is obviously manufactured by, that's from the Lehigh University bookstore. So I always tease my friends from Duke, and they're like, "That's the one thing you got, right?" I'm saying, "Yep, I got that one thing." Then.
You got the one thing, and you're good with that. That's maybe a once in a lifetime thing, but
I think so.
You caught him on a good day. Hey, let's wrap up here real quick. One takeaway, something you want people to keep in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we talked about very early on is that think about this place in a different way from a typical airport. Yeah, there's times when you can come out here and not see a gate that's empty, but also know that at that very same moment, there's a third shift of people working over at HACO with probably 500 or 600 people working at that moment at 1 o'clock in the morning. So, we're a different place, a different animal, and we're the biggest employer of airports in the state. This 8,600 people is more than all the other airports combined in terms of the industry now, aerospace, not the airlines. I don't want somebody claiming saying that I said we got more people than Charlotte working for airlines. That's not the case. Mm-mm. But this place of employment is very important, and please, to the extent that any of you picked up new things today, and you can share that with your friends and family, that'd be awesome.
Kevin Baker, Executive Director, Piedmont Triad Airport Authority, has been our guest today. Thanks, Kevin, for hanging out with us. Sindy, we've got just a moment or two. Any quick thought you have?
Well, there was a question about, does PTI have a physical and or remote customer contact center?
I'm sorry, you were breaking up a little bit there, Sindy.
Yep.
Does PTI have a physical and or remote customer contact center?
Yes. So it's both. So if you're out here, we have 2 desks, one at each concourse, basically, where we have ambassadors, we call them. They're all volunteers. They take care of answering any questions that anybody would have, and they're wonderful people. There's about 50 of them altogether. They're just incredible, and they really take care of our customers. And then, we've got an online place where if there's any issue that comes up, you send a note into that place, and it's at flyfrompti.com. You'll get a response. Unless you're the person who calls about the same thing 400 times in 2 weeks, you'll get a response the first time, maybe the second or third time. But, after a point, we say, we get it. There's nothing we can do about whatever it is.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Sindy, for filling in for Teddy today. Just to let folks know, Dr. John Moskoff will be our guest next week, first in August. What is that? August? I have a wall calendar. August 2nd. And John will join us to talk about issues in clinical ethics. He works with and coaches and counsels would-be, or I guess upcoming doctors on some clinical ethics issues. And we also will dare to put our toe into some of the real hot button issues out there with ethics, whether it's stem cell research, abortion, euthanasia, cloning, you name it. We could spend all day talking about it, but we'll have an hour next week with Dr. John Moskoff. So hope you can join us then. Again, thank you, Kevin, for joining us today. And thank you, Sindy. And thank you again for those who have watched today, another Lunch with Randy and Teddy. Have a great day.